Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Donald Trump's 80th birthday is coming up in just 2 weeks, and as is his style, he's been corruptly lavishing himself with presents all year in preparation. But today, 3 separate federal judges started raining on his parade, a quick succession of court decisions over the course of just a few hours rebuking Trump on some of his seemingly highest priorities in office. I mean, these are the things that keep him up at night. These are the things he thinks about, that he plots about, that he talks about to the press and anyone who's listening. There is clear evidence of the growing backlash to his profiteering off of his petition. Like when he unilaterally put his name above John F. Kennedy's on the Kennedy Center. Not, profit per se, but let's just say self-aggrandizement. A federal judge today ordered Trump's name permanently removed from the building, saying, quote, and this is true, Congress gave the Kennedy Center its name and only Congress can change it. That was just the beginning of Trump's very bad day. The next shoe to drop was over his planned $1.8 billion slush fund to pay the people who helped him try to overthrow an election the last time he lost, and we should say, essentially anyone else that he wants to. The plan is now falling apart. A federal judge in Virginia put the brakes on that slush fund today, halting it as multiple lawsuits against Trump's DOJ work through their way through the courts. Remember, Trump's DOJ proposed this fund at a settlement to Trump's $10 billion lawsuit against the IRS that Donald Trump controls. And today, the federal judge in Florida, who heard the lawsuit, right, when Trump filed the lawsuit against the IRS, she said she is reopening that lawsuit to investigate grievous allegations that the settlement was, quote, premised on deception and made the court the victim of a fraud. That was a response to a motion by 35 former federal judges saying the Trump administration might have defrauded the court with its settlement. The settlement seems like a product of collusion, not a good faith process between 2 parties in a lawsuit who are, crucially, adversarial to each other in a controversy, as the Constitution describes. In fact, one of the signatories, one of the retired federal judges who signed onto that brief, explained on our show just last night how there could have been a fraud on the court.
This could only be paid over if there was litigation, if there had been a claim. And so, therefore, they went to court to make a claim. The problem is that the claim was really, as we said in our papers, a collusion, was a fraud on the court, that the claim was really not a real claim because it was Donald Trump bargaining with himself, as you said before, the snake bargaining with himself. So the motion was to reopen the case. Not that we're saying that it is a fraud or not fraud. We're saying there's enough here that the judge should investigate, should be opened to see what's going on.
Now, I'll be honest with you, when we had Nancy Gertner, who you just saw there on the show last night, who's been a frequent guest and who I always love hearing from, when we had her on the show saying this, again, I don't know the law well enough, it seemed a bit of a long shot, like to go in and be like, wait a second, wait, not so fast. But guess what? Not such a long shot. That judge that received the filing is now giving the government until June 12th. They have to file something explaining how the slush fund plan is legitimate. They actually have to reply and say, no, we weren't colluding, we were adversarial, as hard as a case that might be to make, or the whole thing might be scuttled entirely. So that's 3 huge rulings just today, just in a few hours this afternoon into the evening, challenging some of Trump's most grossly corrupt acts. Then, just before he got on air, another federal judge ruled that he could not dismiss the indictments of Oath Keepers leader Stewart Rhodes and fellow supporters who plotted the attack on the Capitol on January 6th because the Justice Department hasn't offered any facts or evidence to justify it, despite the fact that they are trying to rescind those. Just more evidence of Trump's waning power and influence, and also of the just sheer lawlessness of his rampage through the nation that federal judges have been trying to stop. This is even as he's taking the nation's birthday party and turning it into his own. I mean, it's the 250th birthday of the country. Trump has sort of appropriated the whole thing as a Donald Trump birthday party. He's throwing himself a USC party. There it is, in front of the White House, a live televised cage fight that's happening on the White House lawn on Trump's 80th birthday in 2 weeks, by the way. And that pairs wonderfully with another one of Trump's gifts to himself. And again, he's been making lots of these. He's not someone who likes to deny himself much. A big bunch of stock in, yes, you guessed it, UFC's parent company. between $15,000 and $50,000 worth in late March, according to disclosures first reviewed by HuffPost. The White House told MS Now there are no conflicts of interest. Great. No, there's just a stock purchase and then a giant UFC event on the White House lawn that he's been promoting for months. What could possibly be a conflict of interest about that, right? Donald Trump feels entitled to lots of gifts all the time now, even when it's not his birthday. In fact, every day is kind of his birthday. I think that's the way he views it. This increasingly brazen and ham-handed corruption is also, I think, getting harder to sustain as gas prices still hover above $4 a gallon and a vast majority of the country says the economy's awful and his political strength collapses. That's especially with regards to the seditionist slush fund, which might be the single most repellent and audacious idea he's come up with yet. I mean, members of both parties have now introduced bills to block it. One congressman is pushing to subpoena the Trump officials who were involved in putting the plan for that fund together. That congressman is Jamie Raskin, Democrat of Maryland. He's a ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, and he joins me now. Congressman, I think you and I would both agree that federal district court judges, that's the lowest level in the federal judiciary that has 3 levels, district, appellate, Supreme Court, across ideological lines, across the party that nominated them, have really consistently kind of just said up is up and down is down, you know, black is black and white is white when it comes to Trump. And today we have another example with respect to the slush fund. So first, let me just start with your understanding of the significance of both of these rulings. 1, to just stop it, and 2, down in Florida, to reopen the case.
It's monumental. And the constitutional philosophy that's been advanced by tens of millions of Americans across the country of no kings, I think is also being taken up by the federal judiciary. These people are saying no kings. We're actually going to enforce the law as it is. So it's a remarkable day for the rule of law in America as the judges peel back the various layers of the onion and reveal nothing but a fraud at the heart of it. And that fraud is obviously propounded by Donald Trump, but Attorney General Todd Blanche is right in the thick of it. I mean, they filed a motion to dismiss on July 23rd of 2025 in a case not only exactly on point legally, but on exactly the same point factually. It related to the same leak that Trump was concerned about. This is the one that sent Charles Littlejohn to jail for leaking information about Trump's taxes. And the DOJ, under Todd Blanche and under Pam Bondi, sent in a motion to dismiss, which succeeded, saying that you can't recover against the government for the misdeeds of a private government contractor. They knew it. They won on that point, and then they turned around in this case, and they agreed with Donald Trump that he should get $10 billion.
Yes, right.
Yeah. So now they're all going back and saying it was a fraud on the court from the beginning. There was collusion between the two sides. They weren't owed $1, much less $10 billion. So the settlement, the so-called settlement, was completely fraudulent. It was an attempt to set up this $1.776 billion political slush fund for their friends, and then also an attempt to wipe the slate clean for any tax fraud, tax crimes, or other federal crimes or federal civil violations that were undertaken by Trump, his family, or his businesses, which, of course, had nothing to do with the original matter of the leak in the first place. So they tried to sneak into this whole thing, this wipeout of liability, a super pardon by the attorney general for the president, his family, and his businesses. And now suddenly it's clear the emperor's got no clothes. This was a fraud on the court that they're trying to turn into a fraud against the country.
This is like Coachella for bands that hired their cousin as their tour manager. The listed performers include pop duo Milli Vanilli, one of whom is dead, pop duo CNC Music Factory, another of whom is dead, the Commodores, minus the original singers from the Commodores, and minus the new singers from the Commodores who backed out today, too. But don't worry, Bret Michaels, Flo Rida, Vanilla Ice, and the guy from the Cracker Barrel logo, Tootin' on the Jug, are in. So far. We'll check back on that tomorrow to see if they're still in.
Hi again, everybody. It's now 5 o'clock in New York. Now he's even lost former Celebrity Apprentice winner Bret Michaels. Jimmy Kimmel there on the embarrassment that is Donald Trump's upcoming 250th anniversary celebration on the Mall. And we're not just talking about the UFC cage match / Trump birthday party on the White House lawn. Every day, more and more of Trump's previously scheduled performers and guests for his concert are working overtime to get out of it and distance themselves from him. Washington Post reports this, quote, more than half the performers slated for the Great American State Fair concert series to be held this summer on the National Mall have pulled out, citing the event's political associations. The latest act to drop out is Bret Michaels, the vocalist for hair metal band Poison, citing threats in the event's divisive response. Other artists backing out include Martina McBride, who posted this on social media, quote, it greatly upsets me that any fan who has been moved by my music may now feel like I'm abandoning the meaning behind those songs. Some artists implied that they had been misled about the political nature of the event, including the artist Young MC, who posted this, quote, I have informed, in all caps, I have informed my agents that I will not be performing at the Freedom 250 event. The artists were never told about any political involvement with the event. And if you thought Donald Trump has reached maximum humiliation, there's more. It now appears he has to recruit people to attend that UFC cage fighting match thing on the lawn for the birthday party. I didn't know that grown men had, rides at their parties, but here we are. Washington Post reports this, quote, the Pentagon is moving to recruit hundreds of troops to appear as spectators next month at President Donald Trump's UFC cage fighting event on the White House lawn, and requiring those who attend to pay their own way and to meet height and weight requirements, according to people familiar with the matter and internal memos reviewed by the Washington Post. One memo circulated within the Air Force stipulates that to be eligible, personnel, quote, must meet current waist height ratio and current physical fitness standards. Troops will be required to wear their short-sleeved dress uniforms, the memo adds. Once a beauty pageant owner, always a beauty pageant guy. Donald Trump being forced to recruit people to attend his party as his brand becomes way too toxic for even Poison star Bret Michaels to attend is where we begin the hour with some of our favorite experts and friends. Media Matters for America President Angelo Carusone is here. Also joining us, Puck Senior News political columnist and national affairs analyst John Heilman is here. And joining me at the table, Princeton University professor, political analyst Eddie Glaude is here. He is the author of a beautiful, beautiful new book, America USA, How Race Shadows the Nation's Anniversaries. It's out now. We'll ask him about it in a couple minutes. I was embarrassed reading this in front of this intro about all this cultural stuff in front of Eddie, but not you, Heilman, so I'll let you go first. This doesn't read as real. Like, I have had the most surreal experience this week, and I will admit to being sort of confounded by AI. Like, I watched the bears go inside and like lay on the Labrador's bed, and I'm like, oh, that's so cute. And my son's like, that's not real. So I will admit to not being like a savant when it comes to AI, but I didn't think the cabinet meeting was real. I did not think this Washington Post reporting about the, what is it for men, the waist to bicep ratio or whatever it is, and the short sleeve shirts. I mean, this cannot be happening, that there's no one around Trump that can say, don't put this out there. Your own people are laughing their asses off at you.
I mean, look, it's funny, Nicole, you're more focused on some of the sartorial elements of this. I'm sort of focused on on seeing these stories with these headlines like they're losing people from the lineup, right? And I hadn't really been paying that much attention to this, to be honest with you, because we know what passes for, musical stars in the world of Donald Trump. You get to go to the convention and like Kid Rock is like the big thing. And, and like, you're like Kid Rock is like, Kid Rock, it looks great in comparison to the people who were on this bill before they all dropped out. It's like you're holding an event where Milli Vanilli, which is one of the most embarrassing, fraudulent acts in the history of pop music, where Milli Vanilli is to is too good for you, right?
Is Milli
CNC
Vanilli
Music
the lip
Factory,
sync
well, Young MC,
scandal? Yeah.
Yes. That's the lip sync scandal. But all of these people are people who are all from they're all one-hit wonders from kind of the early 1990s. And I love 1990s music, but these people were embarrassing when they were one-hit wonders. Now they tried to reassemble them for some reason that I don't really understand. And now they're all backing out. And you haven't even gotten to the guy who is the leader of CNC Music Factory. Their one hit was Gonna Make You Sweat. That guy has now dropped out, and he's got a video of himself on Instagram sitting on the toilet where he's describing, oh my God, if you don't like the fact that I've dropped out, I'm going to get a Venezuelan girlfriend and some Venezuelan wine, and I'm going to get an Iranian this and a this and a that. And I'm sitting here on the toilet while I'm recording. I'm like, you want to think about something that looks like it's AI? Go take a look at the guy who's the leader of CNC Music Factory sitting in his John. That was a guy who was going to be a headliner. He was the star of the show until he decided, I'm sorry, I can't be part of this. This is too low even for me. So I don't know what to make of any of it except for the fact that the embarrassment of popular cultural kind of just scraping the bottom of the barrel that Trump has always done. It's like the bottom of the barrel now is scraping back. They're like, I'm sorry, we are the bottom of the barrel, but you're below us in this barrel. And so we are now going to take the high road and decline to take part in your event. I think there's no grander a symbol of how much Donald Trump and MAGA have lost popular culture than that. When Milli Vanilli says to you, I'm sorry, dude, we'll pass on the audience because, our standards are too high, that's how you know you are screwed in terms of pop culture in America.
So we'll stay monitoring our top story, but we have breaking news on the war with Iran. President Trump says he's meeting in the Situation Room right now, posting on Truth Social that he'll make a final determination, in his words, about a potential peace deal with Iran, outlining the terms the U.S. is asking for. It comes after negotiators for the U.S. and Iran reached a potential agreement that would extend the ceasefire, reopen the Strait of Hormuz, and provide cast-iron sanctions relief for Tehran. We're going to bring in MS Now senior national security reporter David Rode. David, just walk us through what the president laid out in his tweet, because I'm seeing things like nuclear dust is going to be unearthed with close coordination between Iran and the International Atomic Energy Agency. There's not going to be any money exchanged, he says, until further notice. I mean, it's a lot of the contours of the deal that we've been talking about, and yet the president also still doesn't say whether he's agreeing to it or not.
Yeah, and look, I hope there is a deal. That's much better, I think, for the world in general. But the president may have just complicated negotiations again by sort of posting this kind of tweet. It does echo in some ways what's in this memorandum of understanding, this document, but every word is critical. So you're right. One major thing that he mentions is what you mentioned is, and it's this thing about the enriched uranium is a concession as far as I'm concerned, because now President Trump is talking about this nuclear material being dug up out of the ground and destroyed. I just want to point out that before the war began, Iran was offering to what they called downblend, or it makes the enriched uranium less enriched. You blend it with other uranium, and that's one way of destroying this enriched uranium. So, and while President Trump, though, before this has been saying all of that enriched uranium had to be removed from Iran, that the U.S. had to take control of it. Specifically, just a couple days ago, he said Russia and China couldn't take the enriched uranium. Now he's agreeing to some sort of process where it's diluted or destroyed inside Iran. That is a win for Iran. There's other things he says, that Iran must pledge that they will never have a nuclear weapon or bomb. Iran's been pledging that for years. Most people don't trust that. American intelligence officials and Israeli intelligence officials don't trust that. So, again, it's just another confusing claim by the president. So, again, we have to see what comes out of this meeting in the White House. And most of all, we have to see the text, word for word, of this memorandum of understanding.
Yeah, especially as you hear prominent officials like Marco Rubio or Vice President J.D. Vance saying that at this point they have the broad contours, but they're debating and delineating over specific word choices. That stuff matters in these memorandums of understanding. And then, of course, in the eventual deal. I don't know that as much thought is going into these social media posts giving updates on where the deal is at, and yet they are instructive. So even as the president says that he's in the situation room right now to make a final determination, we will await to see what and if that determination becomes public. But it all sort of speaks to the piece that you've just written for MS Now, where you talk about how this proposed framework might be viewed as more of a win for Iran than the U.S. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, so there's several ways this helps. I want to be fair, the U.S. The first thing is the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has agreed to that. That would help bring down oil prices. That's an important thing for the Trump administration. But at the same time, the U.S. is lifting its blockade on Iran's ports. That will help Iran definitely. And there's no mention of this agreement of Iran's missile stockpile. And that's a huge issue for countries in the region, whether it's Israel or the United Arab Emirates or Saudi Arabia. Iran has demonstrated they can fire these missiles at any time at these countries, particularly in the Gulf, and damage their refineries and pipelines. That could cause an oil crisis. There's no mention of Iran's proxies. The missiles and the proxies were things that the president brought up on the night he announced the war as one of his 5 top demands. So in the end, there's roughly 4 ways that I think Iran gets wins in this agreement. Also, the nuclear issues that we were just talking about, they're not going to be discussed until a second round of negotiations that'll go on for 60 days. Again, that's a concession by President Trump, and that's what the Iranians wanted in terms of the nuclear negotiations.
I did also think that it was notable that, at least in his social media post, there was no tangible mention of Lebanon, which is supposed to be another sticking point in these negotiations, and certainly a big priority for the Israelis as they watch to see what this deal ultimately is. So we'll keep watching, of course, that, our eyes on the president's social media feed, as well as the White House, as always. But I also want to get you on a big development in another major conflict, David, because earlier today, a Russian drone crashed into an apartment building in Romania. Talk us through what we know and why this is significant.
So, yes, an apartment building near the border with Ukraine. 2 people were injured. No one was killed, thank goodness. And this is an ongoing problem. In the last year, I believe 300 incidents have occurred where Russian drones, sometimes even Russian aircraft, have veered over the border into Romania or Poland or other countries in the NATO alliance. And it's a serious thing because this is a threat to the NATO alliance. And the Romanian foreign minister in a television interview said today they would invoke Article 4. Article 4 is where the alliance leaders talk about how to respond to a violation. Article 5, the next step, is when NATO responds militarily. I don't think we're going to get to Article 5, but it just shows what a serious problem this is and how important Russia's war with Ukraine remains in terms of a threat to the NATO alliance, to Europe. And we are part of NATO still at this point, and we have under treaty, we have to help protect these nations if they are attacked.
Yeah, really, really important. David Rohde, thank you as always.
We're going to pull out our Customs and Border Patrol officers that process these flights and put them in these facilities to help protect our employees coming out of work. And if things don't change, we're going to have to make this step pretty quick.
You know, Jonathan Lemire, the stupidity, I mean, it makes your teeth hurt, the stupidity. Yeah. He's saying what we're going to do is we're going to destroy more global commerce. What we're going to do is make flying on airplanes even less safe. What we're going to do is we're going to try to disrupt operations at one of America's most important international airports, all to help what? Hold people that haven't committed crimes inside subhuman conditions in internment camps? So you're talking about 21st century commerce being undermined, all to make a point about like medieval things taking place at internment camps that Americans don't want. You look at Donald Trump's approval ratings. When did they start really collapsing? The war didn't help. But you look at what happened at Minneapolis. You looked at the fact that U.S. citizens were gunned down in American streets. You look at the fact that ICE officers abused people. ICE officers clearly not trained for the work they were being asked to do, and abused that power. And young people, children, being scooped up off the streets when they came home from school and thrown into internment camps, being treated much worse than the Japanese were treated in their internment camps, if you read history. And again, the lies, the constant lies being told by administration officials who were saying, oh, we're only getting the worst of the worst. No, they aren't. Cato, funded by the Koch brothers, Cato now has that number down at about 5%. Only 5% of the people who are being scooped up and thrown into internment camps have actually committed a violent crime. And yet, to go after Rose, people like Rose, who raised, as Mika said earlier in the show, to grab her, snatch her, disappear her, take her 300 miles from home, this mother of a U.S. Marine who was awarded 2 Purple Hearts, the wife of a Gulf War hero, a disabled vet that she's a primary caretaker of. That's who Mark Wayne Mullins wants. He wants to actually go after them more and totally screw up international commerce. I mean, it is really bizarre how backward these people are. And they are focusing on all the wrong things, which may be why the president has his lowest approval rating. Well, the lowest approval rating of any president, according to Gallup, since Richard Nixon in the midst of Watergate. Maybe he should get people in place that actually focus on the right things instead of these bizarre things like shutting down or disrupting flights at Newark. It's just crazy.
Yeah, this airport plan, and I forget where I saw it, so I can't give credit, but someone said, oh, it's like you saw the economic paralysis that came from the Strait of Hormuz closing and said, oh, let's bring that home. Let's do some of that here. Because it would have such impact beyond these handful of blue cities, these sanctuary cities that DHS wants to punish. And travel executives have warned the government about that. Others in the industry have. Even some Republicans have quietly expressed some reservations. Like, look, this pain is not going to be limited to the handful of cities and states you want it to be. We're going to feel it around the country and beyond.
So we always talk about kitchen table issues. Mm-hmm. We're sitting at your kitchen table right now. Is this where you sit and look at your bills and assess what the next weeks and months look like?
Yes, ma'am.
And what is it like to sit in front of your bills right now at this kitchen table?
It's a little daunting, I'm not gonna lie, even though I have the support of family and, like JP, the prices are just through the roof. I am on a very fixed income. I bring in about, like I said, I'm on the food stamps, and then I'm only bringing in $400 a month.
What worries you the most?
Not being able to afford groceries, not being able to give my daughter, 3 meals a day. Luckily with JP, they do provide breakfast and lunch for my daughter, which takes off a huge load off of my shoulders.
It is so good to be with you. I'm Ariel Reshef. Affordability isn't an abstract concept or political fodder or a Democratic hoax, as Donald Trump has contended for so many single moms that I spoke to in Austin, Texas. These women are current and past participants of the Jeremiah program. It's a nonpartisan nonprofit that helps single moms with housing and childcare while they pursue their professional degrees. And for them, the current economy has them essentially rethinking everything about their already tight budgets. The mom that I just talked to, August, who you just heard from, told me about the increase in her gas prices. So $35 for her could mean the difference between filling up or getting her daughter socks. Another mom, Andromeda, showed us how she bends the nozzle of the gas pump once she's done filling it up so that she can get every single last drop out of that hose. For them, every penny counts. And they are not alone out there. In fact, they are part of a majority of Americans who feel like this economy is just not working for them. And some, like August, who voted for President Trump, feel disappointed. They even regret their vote.
Trump administration officials are fanning out across the country, hoping for a reset and trying to convince voters that the economy is, in fact, on the right track. But is it too little, too late, at least for the midterms? Joining us now, Catherine Rampell, co-host of MS Now's The Weekend Primetime and economics editor at The Bulwark, Susan Glasser, a staff writer at The New Yorker, and David Drucker, senior writer at The Dispatch and MS Now contributor. Catherine, inflation hit a 3-year high just yesterday. All of those moms that I spoke to in Austin say that they feel like they are shouldering this crippling burden of the economic climate that we find ourselves in. High prices are there for groceries and gas, just about everything. Is there any possibility that Americans are going to feel a reprieve anytime soon?
I think that is highly, highly unlikely. If anything, there are a number of forces conspiring to probably make grocery prices, food prices in general, higher throughout the year. That's because, as you mentioned, you have the Iran war, which has driven up fertilizer costs, diesel costs, other inputs that go into producing food. We haven't seen the full effect of those yet, candidly. You, again, have the fact that El Nino, a particularly bad El Nino, apparently, is coming this year and is likely to disrupt crops. Now, I wouldn't pin the blame for that on any particular elected official. That's just natural phenomena. But in addition to all of that, you also have the early effects of the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill that passed last year, which to date has kicked at least 700,000 children off of food stamps, just across the 12 states that have reported data thus far. Again, those are children. We heard a lot about how the One Big Beautiful Bill was going to attack, but hold accountable, supposedly able-bodied adults, the supposedly undeserving poor people who were too lazy to work. We're talking about children here who are losing access to food, and of course their families as well. So all of those things together alone are going to affect food prices and the ability of regular American families to put food on the table, not to mention the downstream consequences of other commodity prices going up and gas prices, as you mentioned.
And even the women that I talked to in Texas who are single moms who are pursuing their degrees say that work requirement still applies to them and that it's really hard to meet the threshold as they're trying to study and keep everything afloat. We see Secretary Bessent out there trying to sell the message that Trump is reversing the tide of manufacturing decline, that what we're seeing at the pump is just, a blip in time. Once the war's over, once the Strait of Hormuz is open, it'll all go down again. But it seems like an uphill battle at this point, Catherine, to convince Americans that the economy is on the right track.
I mean, just look at manufacturing specifically, as you mentioned. We actually have fewer manufacturing jobs today than we did when Donald Trump took office. And that's partly because of his own actions. He has tariffed the inputs that U.S. manufacturers need to manufacture their own products: steel, aluminum, lumber, machinery, chemical, industrial inputs, all sorts of other things that, again, make it harder for American companies to actually build, produce, manufacture, and sell products here. So you have many of them going under, either going under or laying off workers or pausing production. So that alone, again, is quite problematic. It's very difficult for this president to deliver on many of the promises that he made when running for office, given that his economic agenda undercuts pretty much all of them.
David, to put a little bit of a finer point on all of this, Politico released new polling that shows that Trump's economic message just isn't cutting through. 34% of Americans hold Donald Trump personally and fully responsible for the current economy. Only 17% hold Joe Biden fully responsible. 53% of voters think that the cost of living is the worst that they've ever remembered. That's pretty staggering. What can be done to turn that sentiment around, or has the train already left the station? Is it too late?
Well, these things, will ebb and flow. But I think for the time being, the train has left the station. I mean, part of the problem that the president has, and therefore his party, because we're talking about midterm elections, is that, put aside for a minute that they're not happy with his handling of the economy. They don't think he's focusing enough on it, right? And you can't blame them because the president, has his gaze in so many directions, whether it's the White House ballroom or now this anti-weaponization slush fund. There are foreign policy issues he's focused on. I mean, there's the reflecting pool on the mall that he's enamored with, right? And, voters notice when politicians aren't paying close enough attention to their priority. And this has been something that's dogged the president going back to last October, when more voters were still giving him time to bring down prices because he had taken office less than a year before that, right? And I think what's happening now, number one, is that a lot of patience has run out. I think the other thing we should add here is that there are a lot of voters like the ones you interviewed down in Austin, Texas, but there are also lots of voters who, by all accounts, are doing pretty well, right? Earning six-figure incomes. They don't have the same pressures from day to day to put food on the table the way the moms that you spoke to do. And yet they feel stretched. And this is important politically. They feel like they're making enough money that they shouldn't have to feel stretched and wonder how far their dollar is going to go. And that means that there's an even greater pool of voters who are unhappy with the president and his leadership on the economy and are poised to take it out on his party in midterm elections than just those sorts of voters you spoke to, which means there's a big breadth of the country that we might say, you seem like you're doing okay. They don't feel like they're doing okay, and they're looking for somebody to blame.
And as we've learned in many elections now, it is all about how you feel or how voters feel out there. Sometimes the empirical data, even if it is in the favor of the administration, it just matters how Americans feel about these things. Susan, to David's point about the vanity projects from President Trump, you have, 28% of Americans. That's it. That's the amount of people that like the idea of the ballroom. You have the president now urging the Treasury Department to put his face on a $250 bill for the 250th anniversary of the U.S. 21%, that's it, like the Arc de Trump. 12% want his signature on money. These are things the president seems to be focusing on, and we've had reporting. Our Jake Traylor was reporting yesterday that Susie Wiles, the chief of staff, has been telling staffers that Trump is going to just be Trump. Let him say what he wants, but we need to stay on message. How does that work politically, and why can't Trump stick to the script on the economy?
Yeah, I think to me, that's one of the greatest warning lights actually about this moment politically in the country is that Donald Trump is in effect detaching from public opinion. Right. So what are the constraints left on Trump? To a certain extent, public opinion was one of the only ones, or in his first term, that incentive that he had to win re-election. Now, not only is he term limited for not running himself, but he himself is not on the ballot this fall, doesn't seem to care that much about the fortunes of Republican candidates for Senate and House, and in fact remains very focused, as we saw earlier this week, on defeating his opponents within the Republican Party. So, he's even more focused than ever on what a small and shrinking core of MAGA loyalists think about him, maintaining their loyalty. And he's detaching, in effect, from the rest of the country. He's saying, you and what army are going to, stop me. And in fact, the reason he's pursuing these projects is because the Republican-controlled Senate and the Republican-controlled House have refused to stop him, although they do have the powers available to them. It's exhausting, right, going through that news cycle again and again and again. Now's the moment that those Republican senators on Capitol Hill, they're really going to, go after Donald Trump. Now, well, thank goodness we weren't holding our collective breaths because it wouldn't have worked out too well for us. So that's an important dynamic here that worries me from the point of view of where Trump is headed. Potentially, he might become even more extreme after these midterm elections. That's one thing. And then the other thing is just on the economy. It's not just about the vibe. That's the thing. Donald Trump made a very concrete promise. He said, your prices are going to go down on day one. Everyone in America, no matter whether they are super pinched like the women who spoke, I thought very, eloquently in your focus group to that, or people who have more disposable income, everybody in America knows the prices are not just higher, but significantly higher for the basic goods of everyday life. And they also know that Donald Trump is responsible for it. I've seen many analyses that suggest, I'm not an expert, Catherine is, that had Donald Trump literally done nothing as an economic policy, that would have worked out better both for him politically and for the United States of America.
So, David, to Susan's earlier point, you wrote that the base actually adores the president still. His MAGA base is out there strong. They're voting. But a recent poll from CBS News shows that 54% of white voters without a college degree disapproved of the president's performance. His support seems to be eroding. You mentioned in your writing that MAGA voters are turning out in the primaries where Trump has his thumb on the scale, essentially, for MAGA candidates. But what does that signal when it comes to the general election?
Well, look, there's a dichotomy there, right? Because in closed Republican primaries, Trump's strong relationship with committed Republican voters is delivering for him. And we saw that in the defeat of Senator Bill Cassidy, Senator John Cornyn, although there was a little bit more going on with John Cornyn, Congressman Thomas Massie. So there's plenty of evidence to show that President Trump, still has a lot of juice with Republican voters. At the same time, what the polling and the performance has also shown us is that those Republicans we sometimes refer to as sort of normal, traditional Republicans, sort of Republicans that think of themselves as Republicans first and supporters of the president second, right? Not MAGA aligned, but Republican aligned. They've always liked the president's policies. They've never really been thrilled with his provocative behavior, his nasty rhetoric. And they're fine with that as the price of admission if the movie is the one they wanted. If he's delivering on the economy, which is why they voted for him again, they wanted that pre-COVID economy from the first term, they'll put up with this stuff. They're not getting it. And so we're seeing the outer bands of this 2024 coalition fray. And that includes softer Republicans who are not as close to him as those voters that have been showing up in primaries religiously. And that means that Republicans, have a world of hurt waiting for them in a lot of these House and Senate races. Now, obviously, it depends on whether you're in a red state or a purple state. It depends, therefore, does the turnout drop off? Does it actually, cross the aisle to the other side? And how does this play out now? Because we now effectively have a larger Republican majority in the House of Representatives because of mid-decade gerrymandering than we do in actuality right now, where it's just a couple of seats. And so there's still some unknowns there. But we know that the president is just not as strong across the board, and that includes in his own party as he was a year ago.